Jiyan is coming back very soon, and honestly, he's quite a good DPS, especially when you consider he was on the very first limited banner, and we got plenty of new DPS characters since his release. But is he still worth it? Well, that's what I'll be here for, to help you decide by telling you some of Jiyan's biggest pros and cons. That way you can decide if you want to pull him or not. The first thing to mention when we talk about Jiyan is gonna have to be his ridiculous area coverage. This is seen as his biggest upside across the board for a very good reason. This is one of the things Jiyan truly excels at compared to other characters. His attacks have some of the highest range of any character in the game, hitting in a near 360 circle around him and hitting them from a solid distance. Any enemy group that is even remotely close to each other is going to be scooped into the wind funnel. Now, why does AoE matter? Well, this is mainly a boss killing game, right? Well, yeah, but out of Tower of Adversity's 4 hard stages, 2 of them have a wave of mobs before the boss, making that Jiyan's playground. Not only does he hit in a big area, he also sucks small mobs in. They have nearly no chance to escape, and are essentially locked into the pain train. No one can stop Jiyan once he gets going. The only things Jiyan can't really group are big mobs, and enemies that split up on their own. But those are so far and few between that it's not really something worth mentioning. It's not like other characters would deal with it better than Jiyan. And on topic of multi-target content, a lot of it is also multi-wave. And guess what Jiyan is great at dealing with? Jiyan's damage output is incredibly consistent, meaning that no matter when you choose to get into Jiyan's DPS phase, he won't be cucked by ulting too early or anything like that. He scoops enemies into his death funnel, and once they're dead, he won't stop. Compare this to the likes of Jinshi. If a wave of enemies is almost dead but just not yet, and Jinshi only has her nuke left, you either stall and pray you can kill before you can't use the nuke anymore, or you waste all of your stacks on a mob who would have died to a sneeze. This is why Jiyan in particular is great for multi-wave content. He could not give a damn about the enemy's health bar, because he will annihilate it just the same. Whether on the brink of death or they still got fight in them, he does not discriminate. There is not many characters who are as consistent as Jiyan is. Cheng-Li has her Flaming Sacrifice and ult, Jinshi has her Solar Flare, Sheng Liao has his initial cast and hypercube skills, Kalchara's Death Messengers, yada yada. You'd prefer to not waste them on an enemy that's almost dead, but Jiyan doesn't have anything like that. His consistency means he can always do his job and never waste any damage. Now here's the part I still use to claim Jiyan as the current second best DPS in the game. He is genuinely brain dead to use. For all my Genshin players out there, think of Jiyan as a pre-Shilona Nouvelette. He has the highest AoE potential of all DPS characters and is incredibly easy to use, but his damage is a little lower than the more specialized options. This didn't stop people from saying Nouvelette is Genshin's best DPS. Now obviously the meta-climate is different in Wuthering Waves, mainly because Jinshi is just absurdly broken, but ease of use in this game is important. Since you're focusing more on dodging enemy attacks, playing a DPS who requires minimal attention makes it significantly easier to pay attention to the enemy. This means dodging is easier, etc, etc. You get the point. Now we get into the less good stuff, which is just as important if you were to ask me. This first one may be the most obvious at all, being that Jiyan is not top tier when it comes to his damage output. Jinshi is just so far above everyone else that everyone who is not Jinshi is just fighting for second place, and Jiyan is one of them. And because the DPS ceiling is so high, this gives Kuro games a good excuse to make the DPS checks higher, because they know someone can already deal with it. While I don't see them doing this until at least 2.0, the possibility of it means Jiyan is already in the danger zone. Camellia is also coming to raise the DPS ceiling, and she's the literal next banner. This means that the chance of the DPS requirements for Tower of Adversity increasing is getting higher. But I will say that Jiyan not being Jinshi level is a bit of a nitpick, because ultimately this applies to every DPS that, you know, isn't Jinshi. And what makes it worse for Jiyan is that getting upgrades is not happening to him anytime soon. Now, why do I say this? Well, Kuro Games has already revealed that they consider the Jiyan team to already be complete. They always intended Jiyan to be glued to Mortefi's waist, which means that the arrow heavy buffer will not be coming for a significant amount of time. Mortefi is also already an incredible support for Jiyan. While he does not have Sanhua levels of field time, he makes it up for in deeps. Mortefi is responsible for about 18% of the Jiyan team's damage, which isn't insane, but it's still pretty good. Mortefi also has a lot of other sources he can use for buffing, since he is a gun character. He is able to use the Static Mist. This weapon is really good for buffing, since it gives the next character 10% attack at R1, while also giving Mortefi energy regen and crit rate that he can use for his own damage. Not only that, his Sequence 6 also buffs the entire team's attack by 20% after he uses ultimate, which is quite a significant amount of attack. This means that an S6 Mortefi with R1 Static Mist and 5-piece Moonlit is a sub DPS with Jeji levels of DPR, a 52.5% attack buffer, and a 38% heavy attack amp buffer. That is an incredible amount of utility for just one character. So where does Jiyan go from here? And for the final point, we have a bit more of a nitpick again, which is that Jiyan doesn't really have any movement advantages. Every limited DPS that we have right now has some way to move quickly to opponents, or maybe even a way to dodge enemy attacks more easily, but Jiyan does not. Changli and Shengliao both have a lot of gap closing abilities. Changli has aerial attacks, nullifying things like the impermanence Heron's flight. Meanwhile, her True Sight Conquest is able to essentially let her teleport to the enemy. Shengliao, while not as good as Changli at this, is able to close very significant gaps with both of the variants of his skill. They essentially drag him across the floor to hit the enemy, which is pretty funny to look at times. Jinchi has slow movement in her aerial state, but she is able to use her skill to close very significant distances. And if she doesn't get right into the enemy's face, it doesn't matter, since her attacks are ranged. Jiyan has no movement advantage like this, so if a boss runs away, he will be losing damage. And more importantly, losing energy. Jiyan really likes having all of his energy, and losing some can be very detrimental. He also has some issues with auto-targeting when enemies are not close to each other, but that's more of a nitpick. So, will you be pulling for Jiyan? I definitely think he is worth getting. He is still in my opinion the second best DPS, maybe losing to Camellia when she comes out. If you pull for Jiyan, you are, at least in my opinion, not making a mistake. He made my journey during 1.0 a lot smoother as I was starting out with Colcharo. The sheer convenience he brings is insane. I still prefer to use him over my S6 Jinchi for Tacit Fields, since he is better at multi-wave. But let me know in the comments if you're getting him. And while you are there, you can subscribe and like the video too. If you have any questions, the best way to reach me would be via my Discord or my Twitter, which are linked in the description. But that'll be all from me. Peace.